I live in a small town in the United Kingdom. I am not going to tell you exactly where, but I will say that it has the word hill in the name. And every single year, our town council thinks they are absolutely hilarious by hosting a sad little street carnival that we all jokingly call the Nothing Hill Carnival. Get it? Yeah, very funny. I would rather have literally anything else, but anyway, I am only being bitter because of what happened to me there. For years, I actually had a decent time at this carnival. It was low budget, sure. 3 parade floats if we were lucky. Overpriced handmade crafts nobody needed. Bad music, but it was a laugh with friends, and honestly that was enough. And then in 2014, everything changed. That year, I had just started dating a new guy. His name was James, and he is now my husband, so I might slip and call him that as the story goes on. We showed up to the carnival together and immediately got sucked into the cheese stalls, which were surprisingly good that year. James is a big cheese person, and honestly so am I. We ended up spending over £80 on cheese and nearly £20 on bread. An absolutely ridiculous amount of money for a small town carnival, but we had no regrets. Now here is where you need to start paying attention, because things are about to take a very sharp turn. While we were standing at the cheese counter, the parade started. Leading the whole thing was a local marching band made up of elderly men dressed in what looked like 1940s gear. They were doing their best, bless them. But imagine a group of pensioners marching under a blistering summer sun, playing bugles and French horns while looking like they might pass out at any moment. It sounded exactly as rough as you are imagining. I whipped out my phone and started filming because this was pure gold. Unfortunately, that video is gone forever, and you will understand why in a moment. Right behind the marching band came a group of clowns. Some were doing cartwheels, some were just stumbling around like they had wandered out of a pub and accidentally ended up in a parade. One bigger fella was actually brilliant, doing front flips and all sorts. James kept tugging on my arm trying to get me to look at something, but I thought he was pointing at the acrobatic clown. He was not. He was pointing at a different clown. A skinny, lanky figure with a bald cap and tufts of green hair above each ear. And something about the way this clown walked looked very familiar. Before I could figure out why, this clown started shoving his way through the parade, pushing a trumpet player out of the way, and barreling straight toward us with wild eyes and face paint dripping down his sweaty skin. He stormed right up to us and accused me of moving on from him very quickly. Oh no. It was my ex-boyfriend. We had broken up nearly 2 years before this moment. James was not even the first person I had dated since then. I told my ex that it had been a long time, and he got emotional. He said he had never gotten over me. And then, while dressed as a half-finished clown with smeared makeup and dark facial hair poking through the grease paint, he attempted to quote the famous speech from the movie Notting Hill. He got it completely wrong, by the way. Something along the lines of, "I am just a guy hanging out with a girl asking if she will let me love her." I did the worst possible thing I could have done in that moment. I laughed directly in his face. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a jar filled with a very cloudy liquid and started unscrewing the lid. He said something like, if I was going to laugh in his face, maybe I would like some of this in my face instead. And then I smelled it. A sharp, caustic, burning smell. My brain caught up about half a second later. This was acid. Stay right here, because what happened next involves a surprisingly heroic clown, a very angry husband, and the luckiest grease paint recipe in human history. The big acrobatic clown from the parade, whose name I would later learn was Len, had been watching everything unfold. The moment I shouted that I thought the jar contained acid, Len did not hesitate. He launched himself out of the crowd and slammed into me, pushing me sideways just as my ex threw the liquid. Most of it missed. A small splash hit the shoulder of my shirt, and I ripped it off immediately. Whatever my ex had cooked up, which we later found out he had stolen from the chemistry lab at the school where he worked as a janitor, was not as strong as proper acid, but it was still strong enough to burn exposed skin, and some of it hit Len directly in the face. Here is the incredible part. Len used a special homemade grease paint that combined a water-based lubricant with baking soda. He swore by it as a professional clown because it never ran in the heat. And as insane as it sounds, that combination almost completely neutralized the acid on contact. Instead of devastating burns, Len ended up with only a few small scars near his hairline. He kept his eyes shut, asked for water and something to wipe his face with, and I soaked my shirt and helped clean him off immediately. Len is now a lifelong friend, and I am still amazed by him. Meanwhile, James had my ex pinned to the ground and was delivering the kind of justice that a man does when someone tries to throw acid at his girlfriend. I had to yell at him to stop, because at some point it started looking less like self-defense and more like a criminal charge waiting to happen. There were plenty of witnesses, including police officers nearby, so James was not in serious trouble. My ex did go to prison. He agreed not to press charges against James in exchange for having some of his own charges reduced. I have a restraining order against him that I keep renewed to this day. And to my ex, wherever you are, I truly hope you have become a better person. But you will always be a cautionary tale to me. This one is my fault. Entirely my fault. And I did not confess to it until my wedding night. When I was about 6 years old, my babysitter used to let me watch horror movies from my parents' VHS collection. I handled almost all of them just fine. I was a tough kid. But there was one single movie, that absolutely destroyed me. And if you have seen it, you are going to laugh. Gullies 2. Not a serious horror film. More of a comedy horror. Not even a celebrated entry in the Gullies series. But there is a scene in that film where a clown sits on a dunk tank at a fairground, gets dropped into the water, and a little fish creature bites his arm off and kills him. And 6-year-old me came to one very clear and logical conclusion from that scene. The dunk tank at a real fairground must also contain something dangerous in the water. Piranhas, sharks, or some kind of ghouly creature lurking at the bottom. That was just what the dunk tank was for. That was the whole point of it. Now hold on, because it gets worse. My dad was a sheriff deputy. He signed up to sit on the dunk tank at our local fair. To my absolute horror, this meant my father was volunteering to be dropped into a tank full of monsters. I could not tell him why I was so upset, because then I would have had to explain that I had been watching Gullies too. And I was not about to get into that conversation, so I just cried and begged him not to do it, and nobody understood what was wrong with me. The night of the fair arrived and I knew I had to attend, just in case I could somehow save him. I watched the tank get filled with water. My dad climbed up on the seat wearing a clown costume, including a giant ruff around his neck that stopped him from looking downward. The tank was about 8 feet high, so I could not see into it either. Every time someone stepped up to throw a ball at the target, I would cough or sneeze or make some kind of noise to throw off their aim. This actually worked for a while, or possibly the people in our town were just bad at throwing. Eventually a local man noticed what I was doing and joked with my dad that his kid was trying to save him. I took this as confirmation that everyone knew the danger was real. Even my dad knew. And yet he was still up there. I snuck around to the back of the tank, looking for some kind of solution. That is when I spotted 3 teenagers in the bushes. I knew who they were. They had a reputation as troublemakers. And I watched them use knives to pierce the back of the tank, draining the water out into a ditch nearby. One of them said something like, This will put a stop to that monster. I thought they were on my side. I genuinely believed they knew about the goalie and were draining the tank to protect my father. I walked over, told them they were doing a good thing, and promised not to say a word. They laughed their heads off and kept going. What I did not understand was that my dad could not see the water level dropping because of the ruff around his neck. And neither could the people playing the game. The tank looked exactly the same from the front. A few minutes later, someone finally hit the target and the seat collapsed. My dad dropped about 10 feet into a tank that was almost completely empty. He had no idea it was dry. He could not brace himself. He landed straight onto his legs and shattered one ankle while breaking the fibula of the other leg. I stood there, tiny and terrified, convinced the goalie had gotten him after all. Dad spent weeks in the hospital. The teenagers were caught within a couple of weeks and admitted everything, including mentioning a small child who had been nearby talking about goblins or something. My mom, dad, and sister all figured out it was me. But they never said a word. They let me carry the secret. I finally told my dad the truth on my wedding night. He was the mayor by then, having retired from police work because of the injury. He laughed until he cried. Turns out he had already known for years and had simply decided that the worst crime I had committed was trying to protect him from a movie monster. I still feel bad about it. But at least he thinks it is funny now. This story is from the 1980s, and I want to say up front that what happened was devastating. But I also know that the person at the center of it would have wanted the story told. We were a group of alternative kids. One girl with huge green permed hair, me with a mohawk, the usual suspects, and then there was our friend, who I will call Tony, after Tony Clifton, the Andy Kaufman character he loved to impersonate. Tony dressed like a 1950s dad. Beige tank top, braces, chinos, thick, rimmed glasses. Completely square-looking in a group of punks, which was exactly the point. He was the wildest one of all of us. We were at a coastal fun fair that had a well-earned reputation for being a little unsafe. Broken rides, minor injuries, the kind of place where it felt like the safety inspections were a formality at best. We loved it for exactly that reason. We were young and stupid and invincible, or so we thought. Tony overheard two carnival workers talking near one of the roller coasters. They said the safety bar in one of the carriages was not locking properly, and that whoever was running the ride should either slam it down hard or avoid using that carriage entirely. Tony looked at us with that expression we all knew too well, and whispered that we were doing this. He sprinted to the coaster before the workers could pass on the warning. The ride had no line. The rest of us refused to get on. We watched from the ground as Tony settled into the problem carriage, let the operator push the bar down, winked at us, and showed us with a little wave that the bar had not fully locked in place. The ride started, and Tony was managing it. He was holding the bar steady with one hand and gripping the carriage with the other. As the coaster moved through the early part of the track, he was doing it. The absolute legend was actually going to pull it off. Then came the big incline. At the very top, he leaned forward and gave us a thumbs up. I think he misjudged exactly when the drop was coming. The coaster launched downward and Tony was not holding on when it did. He went flying out of the carriage and through the air. I swear to this day that I saw a smile on his face. Maybe that is just something my mind invented because it was easier to believe than the alternative. Everything around me went slow and underwater and wrong. People were screaming. Tony's body disappeared over the tree line beyond the park. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life. What I found on the other side of those trees is not something I will describe in detail. I will only say that it was clear it had been instant, and that he felt nothing. Tony was 20, 1 year old. The park was forced to close after that. His family pursued legal action, but it came out under oath that Tony had overheard the workers discussing the faulty carriage and had deliberately chosen to ride it unsafely. The park still faced heavy fines, and the family received a settlement. But full liability shifted, because Tony had known exactly what he was doing. I think he would have wanted it that way. He would not have wanted the workers to lose everything over his own decision. That was the kind of person he was. Ridiculous, fearless, loyal, and completely, utterly irreplaceable. I still think about him at least once a month, and I choose to believe that somewhere out there, he is laughing his head off with Andy Kaufman, absolutely delighted with himself. I grew up outside of Phoenix, Arizona. We were poor, rough, and convinced that nobody in the world was tougher than us. Shortly after this story, I joined the Marines, which genuinely set me straight. But at the time of these events, I was an arrogant young man with something to prove. When the Stanfolk family carnival rolled into the field just outside our town, we saw it as a challenge. We were absolutely certain we could beat their rigged games. We were going to walk out of there with prizes, dignity, and the respect of all the women present. This was the plan. It was me, 2 male friends, my girlfriend, and her friend whom my buddy Pete was desperately trying to impress. We fueled up on churros and soda and headed straight to the games area. My girlfriend locked eyes on this enormous plush octopus in the prize tent. Big as a Saint Bernard. Bright green. Only 100 tickets. I looked at the game setup and thought, 2 or 3 big wins and we are sorted. Easy. Then reality arrived. The BB shooting range had a deliberately miscalibrated gun. I grew up shooting cans with an air rifle, and I am actually a good shot. But the first several shots went completely wrong. By the time I adjusted, I had used most of my round. Out of 30 shots I knocked down 10 ducks. Then the attendant informed me, with a look I can only describe as theatrical pity, that the bonus tickets required 10 ducks in a row from a single dollar, which is essentially impossible by design. The ring toss was physically impossible. The rings could not fit over the targets when thrown from a standing position. The attendant demonstrated by dropping a ring straight down from above and smiled like this proved something. The guy then handed me a free ticket for, in his words, sucking worse than anyone he had ever seen play. We tried every game: baseball pitching, hook a duck, darts, basketball. Each one had a hidden rule or a physical impossibility baked in. We ended up with 20 tickets combined, a fifth of what I needed. I was running out of money and out of ideas. So I went to the prize tent and begged the guy working it to just sell me the octopus. I had $20 left to my name until my next paycheck. The attendant was actually sympathetic. He said he understood completely, but that his dad, who ran the whole carnival, would kill him if he sold it for anything less than its listed value. And that is when I completely lost my mind. I pointed over his shoulder and yelled that the Ferris wheel was on fire. He turned for just a second. I shoved him over the counter, grabbed the octopus, and ran. I screamed at my friends to get to the truck. They saw me sprinting down the fairway, waving a giant plush octopus over my head, and they understood immediately that it was time to go. My friends started smashing up whatever they could grab to cause a distraction. Garbage cans, benches, a baseball bat from one of the game stalls. The owner of the carnival, a large man named Stan Stanfolk, stepped directly into my path holding a chain. He told me I was trying to steal from him. I told him his games were rigged and that he had no honor. He told me he was going to chain us to motorcycles and drag us through the town. We got out. Pete floored the truck, and several carnival workers on motorcycles chased us for what felt like forever. I was standing up in the truck bed, holding the octopus over my head like an idiot, taunting them. And then I dropped it. The octopus flew out of my hands and disappeared into the Arizona desert. I lost the one thing I had risked everything to steal. The carnies eventually gave up the chase. They reported the vandalism, which was fair. The carnival left town the next morning. My girlfriend broke up with me the following day. I never found the octopus. I am deeply ashamed of that night now. I was wrong about basically everything. The carnies were running a business, and yes, the games were rigged, but everyone who walks up to a carnival game knows on some level that the odds are not in their favor. That was not their fault. It was ours for deciding we deserved to win anyway. Years later, after the military straightened me out, the Stanfolk family carnival started receiving a small anonymous donation every month from an unknown source. I will leave it at that. This story belongs to my grandmother, who is 83 years old, and has given me full permission to share it. I am writing it in her words as closely as I can. Back in 1967, I was 18 years old and apparently quite beautiful, or so the men in my life kept telling me. When I turned 18, I entered our state beauty pageant, which was held as part of the Grand State Fair that year. The judges were the state governor, the town mayor, and a local businessman. All three were complete gentlemen, and the whole experience was genuinely wholesome and respectful. I was proud to have made it to the state finals. There were 5 of us finalists, all local winners, all friendly with each other, all excited. We were backstage getting ready for the first round, which was a catwalk in dresses made by a local dressmaker. We were not yet fully dressed when the door burst open. A man stood in the doorway. He was muscular with long hair and a strong jawline. He said he was a sheriff deputy and that there had been a prowler spotted near the dressing room window. He laughed and told us not to be embarrassed, that he had a wife and 2 daughters our age. We finished getting dressed while he watched. And over the following months of the competition, he was there every single time. Every time we changed, he was present, watching openly, making no attempt to pretend he was doing anything other than exactly what he was doing. During the swimsuit round, one of the braver girls told him directly that she was not comfortable with him being there. He pulled out his badge and told her she risked her place in the competition, or even an obstruction charge if she caused problems. None of that was legally true, but we were flustered and rushed and scared of losing our spots. So we solved it ourselves. One girl changed while the other 4 stood in a wall blocking her from view. We rotated until all 5 of us were dressed. The man was furious, but had absolutely no legal ground to demand anything from us. We performed. The girl who had spoken out won first place. I came third. We were thrilled. When we went to find the actual sheriff to mention the deputy's behavior, he went very quiet, then very pale. He told us it was the deputy's first day, and that he had never been authorized to be in our dressing room. There had been no prowler reported. And when we described the man, the sheriff said that was not his nephew at all. His nephew, the real new deputy, was a large red-haired man. They found the real deputy later, stumbling out of the wilderness with his ankles and wrists tied together, wearing only his undershirt and underwear. He had been knocked unconscious, stripped of his uniform and badge and firearm. The firearm was later found in a trash bin near the pageant hall. Someone had ambushed a law enforcement officer just to steal his identity and use it to watch young women undress. Now here is the part that still keeps me up at night. About 11 years later, in 1978, I was watching television with my husband, and I suddenly pointed at the screen and said, "That is him." My husband asked, "Who?" And I told him I was almost certain that one of the contestants on the game show we were watching was the same man who had posed as that deputy all those years ago. The show was the dating game. The contestant they introduced was named Rodney Alcala. I cannot be 100% certain. It was 11 years later, and my memory is not perfect. But Rodney Alcala, who won that episode of The Dating Game, is known today as the dating game killer. A serial killer who was active during exactly that era. I truly hope I am misremembering, but the thought has never fully left me. Okay, I need to preface this by saying that my boyfriend told me to write to you, and also that the nerdy detail at the heart of this story is completely relevant. I also want to say that nerds are cool, and I mean that sincerely. I am going to call my boyfriend Hank. When this happened, we had only been dating about 6 weeks. All I really knew about him was that he played college football and was great at pickup basketball. Our first date was literally a one-on-one basketball game. He was competitive, athletic, confident. Absolutely nothing about him suggested what I was about to discover. We went to the state fair with a group of friends. It was a perfect evening. Glowing neon lights, fun rides, carnival games. We got on a scary roller coaster, and I used it as an excuse to hold on to him, which was the plan. We went on the Ferris wheel, and I was hoping for a romantic moment. But Hank kept looking at something, or someone. In another cart on the Ferris wheel. He said he thought he recognized someone, but that there was no way it could be who he thought it was. We moved on. In the Hall of Mirrors, Hank kept glancing over his shoulder. In the haunted house, he nearly punched a costumed actor who jumped out of a closet. He was clearly spooked by something. But every time I asked, he brushed it off. Then he froze completely. Standing near one of the carnival game stalls was a man with bleach, blonde spiky hair, a graphic tee, punk jeans, and probably around 250 pounds of pure simmering fury directed entirely at my boyfriend. Hank pulled me into an alley between two tents and looked me directly in the eyes with the most serious expression I had ever seen on him. He said he had something important to tell me. He looked like he was about to confess to a crime. He said, "I am a professional Warhammer 40K player. At a national tournament level." I said, "Oh, my younger brother would love to talk to you. He plays the fantasy one. I help him paint his miniatures sometimes." Hank looked like he had just been pardoned. He explained later that he had been terrified I would think he was a loser. All those weekends, he had said, he was at tournaments or training, most of it was Warhammer. He was almost simultaneously a serious college football player and a national tabletop strategy champion. He had been hiding it because he thought it would ruin things between us. Honestly, I found it a bit charming. But that was not the scary part. The scary part was the man with the spiky hair. He was the opponent Hank had beaten in the national finals that summer. A man who lived across the country. A man who had spent months online calling Hank a cheater and saying his army list was overpowered and threatening that one day he would find him in real life and make him pay. He had been banned from most online communities for this behavior. And then he had traveled across the country, figured out what college Hank attended, and gambled that he would find him at the state fair. He had apparently been there all day looking for him. Now, my response to learning all of this was not to take cover. My response was to grab Hank by the hand, walk straight out into the open, find this man in the crowd, and say loudly enough for him to hear that I could not believe Hank had worried about being judged for playing Warhammer when guys like this one over here clearly played it too, and that Hank could probably beat him again in round one. I gave this guy the biggest, most deliberate grin I could manage. His face went purple. He pointed at Hank and started screaming about reckoning and promises kept. I attempted to shout a Warhammer battle cry, which I thought was blood for the god, and Hank quietly leaned over and said, "It is blood for the blood god, babe." I was mildly embarrassed. And then this man, shaking with rage, reached over and grabbed one of the guns from the nearby shooting gallery. He aimed it directly at Hank and pulled the trigger. The gun made a little laser bleep bloop sound. They were laser tag guns. Completely harmless light-based toys. The look on his face as he realized his mistake was something I will never forget for the rest of my life. I grabbed a baseball from the nearby can toss stall and threw it as hard as I could. It hit him square in the face. Within seconds, he was being tackled by a sheriff deputy who happened to be the brother of one of Hank's close friends. The man had a history of threatening online posts, had traveled across the country with clear intent to confront Hank, and had pointed what he believed was a real weapon at another person in front of witnesses and police officers. Even though the gun was a toy, the intent was what mattered legally. We agreed to drop our charges in exchange for mandatory anger management, mostly because I did not want him suing me for breaking his nose. Hank also used his connections in the competitive Warhammer community to have him permanently banned from major national tournaments. The whole thing is almost funny when you describe it. A Warhammer rivalry ending with a laser gun and a baseball at a state fair. But if that toy had been a real weapon, the story ends very differently. Hank and I are still together. He and my brother now help run a local tabletop gaming group. I join sometimes and mostly just play Pokemon. Everything else is a little too intense for me. Stay safe out there. And remember, the carnival games are always rigged. Just let it go.